What if your entire future was erased just because of your skin color? This isn't just a story about rejection. It's about how one woman turned public shame into unstoppable power. Stay till the end to see how she rewrote the history of an entire town and proved that justice can be quiet, but it's never weak. You're Naomi Carter? The man's voice trembled, his face going pale like he'd just seen a ghost. Right there on the train platform, under the open sky, it was as if the whole world paused. "This isn't going to work," he said, barely meeting her eyes. "You didn't say you were—" Naomi didn't let him finish. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Black? You didn't ask." She stood tall, trying to keep her dignity intact as the hat she'd carefully picked out for this meeting now felt foolish on her head. A delicate touch for what was supposed to be a delicate beginning, now just part of the embarrassment. 3 weeks of travel, 6 months of heartfelt letters, a trunk full of dreams and hopes, and now, this. Clinton Hayes, the man who'd poured out his loneliness and longing on paper, the one who'd painted visions of a peaceful life in the countryside, had frozen the moment he saw her skin. "You wrote so beautifully," he stammered, stepping back. The bouquet in his hand drooped like it, too, had given up. "You imagined someone who didn't look like me," she said quietly. He glanced nervously around. People at the station were already beginning to take notice. A well-dressed black woman being turned away by a white man made for an uncomfortable scene in the sleepy town of Riverbrook. "You have to understand," Clinton mumbled. "My business, the community, it's complicated." He pulled a few wrinkled bills from his pocket. "Here, this should help you find a place to stay, just until you figure things out." Naomi didn't move. She stared at him, her silence sharper than any insult. She had left everything behind, her home, her job, her entire past life, for a promise of something new, something better. All of it shattered the second Clinton realized she didn't look like the woman he had built in his imagination. What would you do if a man promised you love, only to reject you the second he saw your skin? Because that's exactly where Naomi stood alone, humiliated, holding nothing but her dignity and a trunk full of dreams. But what no one knew, not the man who walked away, not the town watching in silence, was that inside that trunk was the key to rewriting everything they thought they owned. And that's when a voice cut through the air. "Is that your idea of decency, Hayes? Pay her off and pretend she never existed?" A tall man stepped into the scene like thunder on a clear day. He wasn't flashy, but everything about him commanded attention, sun-warmed skin, expensive but understated clothes, and the kind of confidence that didn't need to shout. "Stay out of this, Whitaker," Clinton said, but his voice wavered. "It became my concern," the man replied evenly, "the moment I saw a man I've known for 15 years behave like a coward." He turned to Naomi. His gaze softened. "Miss Carter, I'm Logan Whitaker. I have a home just outside town. If you'd allow me, I'd like to offer you a place to stay until you decide what comes next. It's quiet. We have more rooms than we use, and my housekeeper's been wishing for someone to talk to." Naomi hesitated. She had learned kindness from strangers often came with fine print. But there was something about this man that made her pause. He wasn't just defending her out of politeness. He meant it. "You can't be serious," Clinton hissed. "What will people say?" Logan raised an eyebrow, his smile dry and cutting. "The same people who buy my crops, lease my land, and rely on my business. I'd love to hear what they have to say." Clinton looked as though he'd just realized he wasn't the most powerful man in the conversation anymore. And Naomi? She realized something else entirely. That maybe, just maybe, the journey that felt like it had ended in failure was actually leading her somewhere she never expected. But what no one knew, not Clinton, not Logan, not the curious onlookers, was that inside her trunk, beneath the neatly folded clothes and mementos of her past, Naomi carried something else. Something that could change Riverbrook forever. Something Clinton Hayes would come to regret more than the moment he turned his back on her. The The Whitaker estate wasn't just a farm. It was a grand Victorian house nestled between sprawling green pastures and tall, rustling trees. As Logan's carriage rolled through the gates, Naomi tried to stay composed, but she couldn't help feeling a mix of awe and suspicion. "Riverbrook's slow to change," Logan said, guiding the horses with ease. "People here cling to the past like it's all they have. Clinton Hayes, he's just a symptom of a deeper disease." When they arrived, a woman named Agnes Doyle greeted them. She was middle-aged, with calm eyes and a backbone like steel. Whatever surprise she might have felt at seeing Naomi, she didn't show it. "The blue room is ready," she said, leading Naomi inside. "Best view of the garden." The hallways were lined with oil paintings and bookshelves that whispered of wealth, tradition, and secrets. That night at dinner, served in a dining room that could rival the governor's mansion, Logan told his story. Son of a northern banker and a teacher who fought for abolition, he'd inherited not only a fortune but also a deep-rooted belief in justice. "I've been here for 15 years, he said over roast duck and red wine. "Long enough to be considered part of the community, but not quite one of them." "And what brought you to Riverbrook, Miss Carter?" he asked finally, looking at her with genuine interest. "I'm a teacher," she replied. "Used to teach literature and history at a girls' school in Boston. When the school closed, I needed a fresh start." What she didn't say, not yet, was that her grandfather, a lifelong servant in a wealthy household, had left her something unexpected, a small stash of gold coins, and a series of dusty old documents. Documents that mentioned land right here, in Riverbrook. And they were safely tucked beneath a false bottom in her trunk. In the days that followed, Logan gave her something rare. Space. No questions, no expectations. Just peace. Naomi spent hours in his vast library, combing through books about the region's history, its laws, and old land records. When Logan asked about her reading habits, she'd just smile and say, "Expanding my horizons." Word of her presence spread quickly. Riverbrook wasn't used to outsiders, especially not black women who stayed at Whitaker's estate. Soon, neighbors started showing up. Just passing by, they'd claim, dropping in for tea or to check on the farm. But it was curiosity, plain and simple. "You've become a bit of a local sensation," Logan said one afternoon as they watched another group of visitors leave, without even leaving the house. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Trust me, Mr. Whitaker. I've always been watched. The only difference now is I'm holding a teacup instead of a school book." They both chuckled. But underneath the calm surface, things were shifting. And when Clinton Hayes finally showed up again, hat in hand, false concern plastered across his face. Naomi was ready. She was no longer the tired, desperate woman from the train station. She had a plan. And Clinton Hayes? He had no idea what was coming. Clinton Hayes stood at the threshold of the Whitaker estate, looking like a man who'd just bitten into something sour. His hat twisted nervously in his hands. "Whitaker," he greeted stiffly. I came to see how Miss Carter is doing." Logan didn't flinch. "She's doing wonderfully," he replied, his tone neutral but firm. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" Clinton's eyes flicked nervously toward the hallway. Then Naomi appeared. But this time, she wasn't the woman he had left behind at the station. Tired, disheartened, clinging to hope. She was poised, elegant, dressed in a gown Agnes Doyle had adjusted to perfection. Her posture spoke volumes. She was no longer just visiting. She belonged. "Mr. Hayes," she said with cool formality. "What an unexpected visit." "The community," he stammered. "Some folks are concerned about the propriety of the arrangement here." "Concerned about what exactly?" Naomi asked, her voice smooth. Clinton's face flushed. "Well, you know, it's not usual. An unmarried woman, living in a man's house." "A black woman," Logan finished for him, his voice soft and razor sharp. "Let's not dance around it, Hayes." Clinton bristled. "It's not just me. The church committee is talking. We're considering raising funds to send Miss Carter back to Boston. That seems like the proper—" Naomi interrupted, smiling without warmth. "How generous. Unfortunately, I won't be returning to Boston. I've decided to stay in Riverbrook indefinitely." Clinton blinked. "You can't just stay." You don't know anyone here. You don't have work. You don't have family. But I do have a job, she replied calmly. Mr. Whitaker has offered me the position of a state librarian. Clinton scoffed. That's not a real... She's more qualified than anyone I know, Logan cut in. And the library's in better shape than it's ever been. What Clinton didn't realize was that this job had a far greater purpose than shelving books. Whitaker's library was a goldmine legal archives, land records, local histories. It held the bones of the town's legacy, and buried in those bones, Naomi was beginning to uncover something big. As Clinton muttered more weak excuses and left, his pride visibly dented, Logan watched him go from the window. He's going to cause trouble, he said without emotion. Men like him don't let go of power quietly. Naomi looked up from the book in her lap, her voice steady. Let him talk. I have work to do. And she meant it. Because behind the elegant dresses, the calm demeanor, and the polite conversations, Naomi Carter was digging. Not just through dusty volumes or old maps, but through generations of cover-ups. She was putting together the real story behind Riverbrook's founding families. The truth hidden behind polished church pews and smiling Sunday faces. And that truth? It wasn't pretty. 2 weeks later, Riverbrook's town hall was packed. The founding families, business owners, farmers, they were all there. Tension filled the room like a storm about to break. At the center of it all, Clinton Hayes, pacing, red-faced, gesturing wildly. It's outrageous, he shouted. Whitaker has thrown tradition to the wind. He's allowing that woman to stay on his land, flaunting decency and making a mockery of our town. Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. Then the doors opened. Logan Whitaker walked in, calm as ever. By his side, Naomi Carter, dignified, composed, carrying a leather briefcase. The room went silent. I appreciate the invitation, Logan began, his voice steady. But there's been a misunderstanding. Miss Carter is not here as my guest. She's here as a legal representative for a matter that concerns all of you. Clinton laughed, nervous and mocking. Legal? Her? Naomi stepped forward. In addition to being a licensed educator, I hold legal power of attorney on behalf of my great-grandfather, Joseph Freeman. Imagine standing in a room full of people who doubted your worth, and calmly pulling out the one truth powerful enough to tear their world apart. Naomi wasn't just here to defend herself. She was about to turn centuries of silence into accountability. The name dropped like a stone into a still pond. Several elders in the room paled. Clinton forced a smirk. Joseph Freeman is a myth, a story passed around to scare newcomers. Naomi opened her briefcase. Interesting, because I have here the original land deed signed by the state governor in 1866, granting Joseph Freeman ownership of what now makes up 60% of Riverbrook. She pulled out yellowed papers, each carefully preserved. That includes your store, Mr. Hayes. The room gasped. Judge Edmund Blake, seated near the front, took the documents and adjusted his glasses. He studied them in silence, his brow furrowing. These look authentic. Clinton leapt to his feet. They're forgeries. They've been authenticated by the State Historical Records Commission, came a new voice. Caleb Monroe, a respected legal figure from the state capitol, entered the room holding more documents. The land was unjustly taken, he continued. Joseph Freeman was run out of town in 1870 after a series of violent threats. The land was split up and distributed by a group calling themselves the Riverbrook Property Committee. Murmurs turned into uproar. Logan stepped forward. Our library held gaps in its records, particularly from 1870 to 1872. Miss Carter located cross-referenced documents that filled in those gaps. The truth was always there, just buried. Reverend Josiah Hart, an old man with trembling hands, slowly rose to speak. My father, he spoke of this once, said it was a sin buried deep, one we were never meant to uncover. Naomi didn't blink. I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm proposing the creation of a community foundation, one that honors my great-grandfather's legacy while helping Riverbrook grow through education, affordable housing, and transparency. Clinton was pale now. You want to take everything from us. No, she said softly. I want to give back what was taken, not through punishment, through restoration. The room was silent. Even Clinton Hayes, for all his bluster, had no words. What he and everyone else was starting to realize was that Naomi Carter wasn't here for revenge. She was here to rebuild. Clinton Hayes looked like a man cornered, blinking under the weight of history that had just come crashing down on him. You planned this from the beginning, he said through clenched teeth. You knew exactly what you were doing when you wrote me. Naomi stood calmly at the front of the hall, her hand still resting on the open briefcase. No, Mr. Hayes. When I first wrote to you, I was just a woman hoping for a fresh start. I never hid who I was. You just never cared to ask. Her voice didn't waver. If anything, it grew stronger with each word. It was your rejection at the station that told me everything I needed to know about you and about what still lives in this town. You'll ruin everything, Clinton muttered, sinking into a chair as the realization set in. No, Naomi replied, her tone soft but resolute. I'll make it right. That's what this is about. Not revenge, not payback, just justice long overdue. Everyone expected her to get angry, to burn the whole town down. But Naomi didn't want smoke, she wanted structure. While others shouted for control, she stood in silence and rewrote the rules. Because true power isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in with a briefcase and changes history with a signature. She closed the briefcase. The council members began murmuring, some already flipping through the documents. The vote on the proposed Freeman Foundation was postponed for deliberation, but the shift in power had already begun. Logan joined Naomi as the meeting ended, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. You could have taken it all, he said, his voice low. Claimed every inch of land that's rightfully yours. And what would that make me, she asked, turning to him. The same as those who took it from my family in the first place? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The admiration in his eyes said enough. 6 months later, Riverbrook didn't look the same. The Freeman Foundation was no longer just an idea, it was alive. Scholarships were being awarded, rundown homes were being repaired, children played in community parks that hadn't existed before. And at the heart of it all was Naomi Carter, not a stranger anymore, but a leader. The building that had once housed Clinton Hayes' general store now held something far more valuable. Riverbrook's first public library. Shelves lined with books, reading corners for kids, a small auditorium for guest speakers, a space for knowledge and for healing. Clinton Hayes? He'd sold his properties quietly, under the weight of social shame and financial pressure, and left town without saying goodbye. Rumor had it he was working in a dry goods shop in a neighboring county. Just another man with a past no one wanted to talk about. You could have destroyed him, Logan said one crisp fall afternoon. The two of them were walking through the gardens, where art installations and student sculptures now stood in place of what had once been private lawns. Most people would have taken everything. Naomi looked at a group of children laughing near the fountain. Revenge is loud, she said. But this? She gestured to the community thriving around them. This is lasting. The Whitaker estate had changed too. Officially renamed the Freeman Whitaker House, it had become a cultural center. Art classes, history exhibits, and open lectures now filled its halls. What was once a symbol of prestige had become a beacon of unity. News of the Freeman legacy had spread far beyond Riverbrook. Historians, journalists, civil rights lawyers, they all came to hear Naomi's story. She spoke at universities, her calm yet powerful voice reminding audiences that justice isn't only something delivered in a courtroom. Sometimes it starts with a rejection at a train station. At a dinner celebrating the foundation's 6-month anniversary, the mansion's main hall was lit with candles and filled with voices of laughter, music, and speeches. Judge Edmund Blake stood to give a toast. His glass trembled slightly in his hand. To the woman who reminded us that history can be rewritten, he said. Not with vengeance, but with vision. The room raised their glasses. Even Helen Granger, once a skeptical townsperson, now served as principal of Riverbrook's first integrated community school. She clinked glasses with Naomi across the table. "To think," she said with a laugh, "this all started with a man who couldn't stomach a strong woman of color on his train platform." Logan reached for Naomi's hand under the table. "Best mistake Clinton Hayes ever made," he whispered with a smirk. She laughed, but there was something quiet and reflective in her expression. Because she knew this story wasn't about Clinton. Not anymore. In the center of Riverbrook's town square, a small bronze plaque had been installed. No statues, no grand marble columns, just a name, Joseph Freeman, and a few simple words. Let truth return to the land it was taken from. Let justice grow from what was buried. Naomi visited the plaque often, not to remember the struggle, but to acknowledge the transformation. On a quiet evening, she stood there once more, arms crossed, watching the twilight settle over the town she had once arrived in as a stranger. Behind her, the porch light of the Freeman Whitaker house glowed warmly. Logan joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "You know what's funny?" she said, taking a sip. "Clinton rejected me because I didn't fit into his world. He couldn't imagine someone like me standing beside him." Logan raised his eyebrows. "And now?" "Now," she smiled. "He's gone, and I'm still here. Not because I changed to fit in, but because I refused to." Logan nodded. "He feared your strength. I cherished it." They stood in silence for a while, watching Riverbrook breathe. It was a new town now, not because buildings had changed, but because the people had, because a woman they once underestimated had held up a mirror and asked them to look. 6 months had passed since the storm at Town Hall, and Riverbrook was almost unrecognizable. Not because the buildings had changed much. Many were still the same brick storefronts and white-painted porches. But the spirit of the town, the way it moved, breathed, spoke, that had shifted. At the heart of it all stood the Freeman Foundation, now fully operational. Funded in part by the settlement agreements and donations from families seeking redemption, the foundation had already awarded multiple scholarships to young people of color, restored dozens of aging homes, and launched a literacy program that was quickly gaining statewide attention. And its founder? She walked down Main Street not as an outsider, not as a curiosity, but as a neighbor, a teacher, a leader, a woman who had come to this town with nothing but a trunk, a broken promise, and the will to change everything. Naomi Carter now. Naomi Carter. Whitaker had married Logan in a quiet ceremony beneath the willows on his estate. It wasn't an event for society or spectacle, just a gathering of those who had walked through the fire with her. Agnes Doyle wept silently. Judge Edmund Blake gave the blessing. Helen Granger brought homemade bread. In a town that once rejected her at first glance, Naomi now stood at the head of something entirely new. A Riverbrook where truth wasn't buried, but honored. And still, her work wasn't finished. One autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the wind, she stood before a classroom of students at the new community school, some white, some black, all wide-eyed and curious. She told them stories, not just from textbooks, but from real life. Stories about injustice, yes, but also about courage. About what happens when one person refuses to bow to what's expected and instead dares to do what's right. After class, a girl with long braids and big glasses approached her. "Miss Naomi, is it true you used to be a teacher in Boston?" "I did." "Why'd you come here then?" Naomi knelt down to the girl's height. "Because sometimes we're meant to go where we're needed, not just where we're wanted." The girl grinned and ran back to her desk. At home, in the Freeman Whitaker house, a different kind of work continued. Naomi had partnered with university researchers to digitize the entire library's archive, ensuring that every land deed, every newspaper clipping, every oral history would be preserved. The old lies that built Riverbrook's legacy, they were now part of the record, fully visible, unchangeable, but no longer hidden. Journalists came from across the country. Documentaries were proposed. Law schools studied the case of Joseph Freeman's land as a blueprint for reparative justice. But Naomi? She didn't care about the spotlight. She cared about the kids reading their first books in the public library. She cared about the farmers now being paid fair rent for land they had unknowingly leased under false pretenses. She cared about the single mother who had just moved into a restored home with running water and a front porch. Those were the victories she counted. One evening, as the town prepared for its winter festival, Naomi stood with Logan on their front porch, sipping warm cider and watching the townspeople string lights along the square. It was hard to believe this was the same place that once looked at her with suspicion, as if her very presence were a threat. "I used to think that justice meant punishment," she said quietly, her gaze following the flickering lights. "And now?" Logan asked. "Now I think justice is giving people a chance to do better, even if they don't deserve it." Logan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You didn't just change this town, Naomi. You changed how it sees itself." She leaned into him. "Let's just hope it doesn't forget." "It won't," he said. "Not as long as you're here." Down in the square, a new tradition was taking shape. Where the old statue of Riverbrook's founding patriarch once stood, there was now a new monument, a garden surrounding a bronze circle embedded in the ground. In the center, etched into the metal, was one simple quote: "Truth cannot be erased. It can only be rediscovered." And just beneath it, a name: Joseph Freeman. Tourists passed it every day, reading the story on the nearby plaque. Locals brought their children there to explain why honesty mattered, why hiding the past doesn't protect the future, it only delays its reckoning. But for Naomi, that place wasn't about the past anymore. It was a beginning. And Clinton Hayes? He never came back to Riverbrook. In a nearby town, he worked as a clerk, shrinking further into anonymity with each passing day. The man who once defined himself by power and reputation now existed as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when pride trumps humanity. No one in Riverbrook spoke his name much anymore. Not out of spite, but because he simply didn't matter. What mattered was what came after: the rebuilding, the learning, the choosing, every single day, to do better. As the winter snow began to fall, Naomi looked out across the fields surrounding her home. Once a symbol of wealth for the few, now a place of growth for the many. She thought of the girl at the station who had been humiliated, turned away like an inconvenience. She thought of the letters she had written, full of hope, and the man who couldn't see beyond her skin. And she thought of the life she had built, not because someone gave her permission, but because she claimed her place in the story, not out of revenge, but out of love, out of legacy, out of truth. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on how we define justice, belonging, and strength, subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories like Naomi's, stories of dignity, courage, and the quiet, powerful act of choosing to build instead of destroy.